Hello everybody, good morning. I hope most of you had a good sleep. The inspiration still resonates, so thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to our speakers this morning. I always leave so inspired from these conferences. And these presentations always change for me considerably after I've spent some time with you. So thanks for the inspiration. 4 years ago, I was at ECPP in Budapest, and I had challenged the idea that there's a marriage between positive psychology and coaching. I said that they really just started dating. And, well, it's been a lot of years of dating now, so I wonder if maybe we can tie the knot. And that's really what we want to talk about today. Can we have the slides up, please? So, the title of the symposium is Positive Psychology Towards a Unified Theory. My presentation has a little question mark in there, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But first of all, my gratitude to my esteemed colleagues and speakers today. I've thought about who are some of the leading people who are thinking about the integration between positive psychology and coaching. And they all said yes. So thank you for being here. At this point, a shout out to Dr. Susie Green, who unfortunately couldn't make it from New Zealand, from Australia, to be with us today. But we'll have a good conversation about what are the meeting points between these two fields, and can we arrive at something like a unified theory or framework for what this actually is. So I've learned over the years that storytelling is a really good way to retain these kind of ideas. So here's my story. Two psychologists walk into a bar. Most of us will have an idea of how that ends. Well, after they fix the bartender, one says to the other, "So what do you do?" And the other one says, "I'm coach." And my horror scenario of that joke is that the other one says, "Ah, cool." And then they change the topic. Because nobody really knows what that means. A lot of us here in this room will know what it means for us, but it usually takes at least a few sentences or half an hour or an hour of a conversation to really figure out what that means. So that's a huge range. If we narrow that down a little bit, you might say, "I'm a positive psychology coach." That narrows it down a little bit, but it leaves it open to interpretation. There's a lot of ways in which positive psychology, if we have an understanding of what that means, can be applied within a coaching context. So somebody might say, "My coaching is grounded in, or informed by, or equipped with positive psychology tools, theories, interventions, models." So that narrows it down even a little bit further. But it's still unclear, and if you ask 10 different coaches who use positive psychology in some way, how they work, chances are there are 10 quite different approaches to working. And that's really why we're here. My heart beats for science. My heart also beats for practice. Recently more for practice than for science, arguably. But I think it's important that we come together and we study what works. And in order to know what works, we need to figure out what are we measuring. So at present, these are fantastic students of ours with Christian over in the back. That was the best photo I could find of you on the internet. So thank you for that. That was delightful. At present, there's no single agreed definition of positive psychology coaching, and even the terminology varies. So we don't really know what we're measuring, even if we were to study and put coaches in the room with clients and say, "Do positive psychology coaching," and then we measure the outcomes. By the way, I'll go through slides, probably quite quickly at times. I will give you a download link to the extended version of the slides, so feel free to keep your cameras down, but feel free to take pictures. I'll pose when I see one. So, for positive psychology coaching to develop its own identity, we really need a framework so we can measure it, because at the heart of science stands that we want to be clear on what it is. And the basis of such a body of knowledge starts with a widely accepted and standardized definition of the concept. That's from a recent meta-analysis trying to arrive at a framework for positive psychology coaching. And I'll say a few words about that study a little bit later. So, where are we in terms of the science? Well, we all know, or at least most of us know, that they're natural allies. They're really good partners. Coaching has been called the applied arm of positive psychology theory. It's the science at the heart of coaching, but also it's been emphasized we need closer collaboration and integration to really figure out what that means. Dora, in her opening keynote at this conference, posed those questions. What makes life worth living? What makes a good life? How can we flourish? How can we live a good life despite all the challenges that we face? These questions stand at the heart of coaching. And yet coaching is pretty underrepresented at this conference, when actually often it's the thinking space in which policies are made. Change makers create ideas, strategies, how to create that change, often through coaching or arguably in a more efficient way through coaching. So I think it's really important that we understand how can we help people think better about those questions. And that's what positive psychology offers. So Robert Biswas Diener, one of the pioneers in positive psychology coaching, argued that prioritizing science as a method of inquiry is what makes positive psychology coaching so special. Not the only coaching approach who utilizes science, so there's more, but there is a clear emphasis on being informed by the science, using the science to inform our coaching practice. But we don't have a clearly articulated definition. We don't have a methodology, framework, or model. We have many, but none that is agreed upon by people in our field. So we really need more data. I'd love to have something like this. A colleague of mine, Eric Dehaan, recently published a book about executive coaching and what works, drawing on the evidence base in executive coaching. So I would love to have this for positive psychology coaching eventually. So we need to measure the outcome. We need to define the approach in order to measure the outcome. So what's the state of play? Well, Google arguably isn't a significant measure, but I find it significant that if you Google positive psychology coaching and definition or define, there's 0 results. I've done this 2 years ago, I've done this again last week, there's still 0 results. There's 2 results for positive psychology coaching definition, but they don't make a lot of references, and there clearly wasn't a process behind there that could be argued as scientific. But there's a lot of people who draw on positive psychology to inform their coaching. So I was tempted to show you about 20 quotes from the literature. I won't, because we have very little time. But I have a presentation that is very much longer, and I'll show you at the end of this presentation where you can find it. What we do find in those quotes and in those articles is an emphasis on well-being, that the approach is evidence-based, that it's informed by theory, of positive psychology theory, that there's a focus on strength, and some also argue the ability to measure well-being particularly, but outcomes and areas for development is particularly helpful, something that positive psychology adds, not uniquely, but particularly with the focus of well-being, they add a lot to coaching practice. So, I mentioned the meta-analysis. Llewellyn van Zyl and his colleagues found common elements in positive psychology definitions. Now they've looked at 2,500 articles. They've excluded most of them, ended up with 24 that they've included in the meta-analysis. And these are the common elements in positive psychology definitions, positive psychology coaching definitions that they have found. I put common in inverted commas because the ones I highlighted here, those are the ones that arguably are within positive psychology. All the rest of those really is just coaching. That's what a good coach does. They don't need to be grounded in positive psychology. And also, out of the 94 themes, only 20% of them mention strength. Only 15% of them mention personal growth and optimal functioning and enhancing well-being. So most of the others, after this, it's 4, 3, 3, 2, 1. So really not very common across these articles. Similarly, in the 8 critical components of the positive psychological coaching model, only the first 2 are arguably within positive psychology. Everything else, any good coach probably does. So, Robert again argued a couple of years earlier already that positive psychology coaching is not an endeavor distinct from coaching itself. Rather, it includes coaching as usual. And if you were to see someone do it, you would see all the usual suspects: agenda setting, powerful questions, accountability, any other elements that you would put into good coaching. But overlaid on this foundation of good coaching would be a series of interventions that are grounded in positive psychological science, harnessing positive emotions, developing strength, increasing hope. And while these topics might seem what all good coaches do anyway, a positive psychology coach is explicitly guided by dynamic research insights. And that's a very important point here, that a positive psychology informed, utilizing positive psychology coach would value the science, would be informed by the ever-changing science of positive psychology coaching. In the same article, the theory of Barbara Fredrickson and Lozada, which was debunked, the positive to negative emotions ratio, was actually mentioned. So I'm like, that's a dynamic research insight that should have been updated in 2020. So I think it's important that we stay up to date with the science if we want to be positive psychology coaches. Yet every coach can be informed by positive psychology. They don't need to call themselves a positive psychology coach. They would still quite like to know what that means when we say positive psychology coach. Yet they arrived at a framework drawing on all these different themes, and they put this framework together that positive psychological coaching can be defined as a short to medium, professional, collaborative relationship between a coach and a client, aimed at the identification, utilization, optimization, and development of personal strength and resources in order to enhance positive states, traits, and behaviors. Utilizing Socratic goal setting and positive psychological evidence-based approaches to facilitate personal growth, optimal functioning, enhanced well-being, and the actualization of people's potential. So if you're a coach here, have a little moment to think how that resonates with you. I reckon there'll be a few who say, that fits what I do, and there will be others who say, mine is a little bit different. So that's the conversation I want to get going. Is this good enough to maybe unite positive psychology coaches? Or do we still have work to do? Another limitation of the meta-analysis is that none of these publications on positive psychology, when Yang reminded me that this is probably the most important one. This one changed a lot. I wrote this one quite a while ago. This one still is relevant still, but Robert updated his thinking in the last 10 years quite a bit. And these two are written from a practitioner perspective. So these edited volumes arguably add the most, because there's so many fantastic people who all utilize positive psychology in their coaching and write about how that's done, including case studies, including their own models. But none of them were included in the meta-analysis because it's not technically peer-reviewed, certainly not blind. Stringent editing process. Mike and I had to go through a few revisions. Thank you for that, it's a better article for it. But we need to take this into account, right? This is where a lot of the conversation happens. So there are a lot of practice models, well, not a lot, but a few. I'm not going to talk about any of them. I just wanted to show that there's some that are quite complex, some that are relatively simple. There's a step-by-step process that probably is also circular. There's an integrative model that includes cognitive behavioral coaching and principles from ACT, hope theory. And this is the one that came out of the meta-analysis that Van Zyl and his colleagues suggested. There might be your model, and I would encourage you to add this and get it published so that other researchers can actually engage with you and say, that's a model I would like to test and see how it works. Judith Moskowitz mentioned this process that we need to look at efficacy and efficiency, and I think it's the same with coaching models. It's just more complex because it's difficult to measure what coaching does and what we're actually measuring. So Robert already 12 years ago said that maybe it's best framed as having basic tenets rather than a complex functional model of its inner workings. But then it's difficult again to come to an outcome because this can look so different for everybody. And every client that has stepped in my room required a different way of working with them. So some of the open questions that I have and that I would like to pose is, what are the necessary characteristics of positive psychology coaching? In practice, how do we tell coaching and positive psychology coaching apart? What's the added benefit of making these distinctions? In a necessarily integrative practice, when we already draw in from so many different schools of thought and approaches, I think it's impossible to have a pure positive psychology approach to coaching. I'm not sure if that exists or will ever exist. And if we claim to be evidence-based, we really need more evidence. So what works in positive psychology coaching? And what are we measuring? Are we measuring positive psychology coaching? Or are we measuring a particular coach delivering a version of positive psychology coaching? Does it necessarily focus on well-being? Do we need more independent researchers? I see a lot of research done by coaches looking at their own coaching model and getting good outcome studies, but if another coach were to try and replicate it, I'm not so sure if we would get good results with it, or results that are significant or meaningful. I need to finish up, right? Good. That's the question I want to ask our panel later. What is coaching as an underlying challenge? Research issues, I already mentioned. There's terminology issues, what do we actually call it? And the way forward is for us here to collaborate. Rob made that argument before already, a long time ago. We need to go and work with each other, the practitioners and the researchers. So here is a very long version of the talk I just gave. And this is the picture you want to take. These are the slides. I've added all of those quotes that I didn't get to mention. I'll give you a moment. I run a coaching lab where you can see positive psychology coaching in action, and I think it's important that we see it and not just talk about it. And thank you very much.